The Elder Scrolls V is based in the northern province of Skyrim. This cold and mountainous land is home to the Nords of Skyrim, whose Admoran ancestors settled there after mass migration from their homeland, the last of which was dated back to the late Merethic era. By the time we're properly introduced to Skyrim in the 4th era, we can come across all of the other races of Tamriel now residing there alongside the Nords, be it as refugees, for political reasons, to study magic, and they can be found residing in the major cities or some even in their own isolated communities. So how do all of these people dress in Skyrim? Considering the climate, cultural differences, and social status, what are the clothing items that we can encounter throughout the province? In this video, we're going to dive into all of that. Before we get started, hi, my name is Angelika, and we are once again going to consult the fashion section of the Elder Scrolls. I will admit, I've been putting off doing this video for a while. If you've seen my previous installments of Fashion Scrolls, you would have probably heard me dogging on Skyrim for all of its shortcomings when compared to the great detail and work that was put into the deeper and less talked about elements of the other games. For the purpose of this video, I want us all to keep an open mind, and right off the bat, I will just say, Skyrim is a great game. I mean, sure, it can feel a little bit bare when compared to its predecessors, but all in all, there were many things that I think that they did right, or at least they took an interesting approach, and it is absolutely worth talking about and analyzing to this day. On the topic of clothing in video games, it is mostly overlooked as it really doesn't affect major elements of a game such as the story or the mechanics. However, I think that it is a rather large part of an RPG for it to be neglected. The clothing worn by NPCs and obtainable by the player is part of what shapes the world that you're in, helps to set the tone and tell the story through the environment and the characters that live there. Whether it adds some refinement and elegance or highlights the struggles of living here, taking the clothing away from these games will be like removing all flavor and having you drudge through a monotonous sea of regular citizens, farmers, and innkeepers wearing armor, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. It is here that I will clarify that we are going to be talking about pieces that don't have any real armor value and are strictly cosmetic. Not everyone in the world is going to be wearing armor and heading off to battle, and that's good. It's part of the fun. What would they need a hero like you for if they could go and get their own Nirnroots and mammoth tusks? To give this video some structure, I've decided to divide it into the following categories: full outfits, robes, hats, shoes and footwear, culture-specific clothing, gloves, jewelry, circlets, and unobtainable items. Now, let's kick off with the full outfits. You may have noticed in the breakdown of the categories, I did not mention a shirt or pants category. In the unofficial wiki, it is actually noted that the reason that shirts and pants are mixed together into clothes and full outfits is to optimize gameplay. It says, quote, "This allows NPCs to be in one place at the same time and reduces the chances of clothing glitches, mislabels, and errors." I feel like that in itself is indicative of a much larger issue, but I digress. The only pair of standalone pants are the ragged trousers, and even then, on female characters, they will appear as a version of the rough spun tunic. Aside from this, all these outfits are what we see people all over Skyrim wear, from the farmers to the traders, the innkeepers, and just regular everyday folk, even if they do make themselves out to be more than they really are. Unlike Oblivion or even Morrowind, there isn't so much explicit indication as to the social status of those who wear a particular outfit or even its quality, except for the fine clothes worn by the richer NPCs or the nobles' clothes as worn by the Jarls. Instead, clothing appears to mostly be specified to professions. For example, we have the blacksmith's aprons, as worn by blacksmiths. We have the chef's tunic, as worn by chefs. There is miner's clothes, tavern clothes, and it's all pretty self-explanatory. You then have the rest of the items just named clothes and separated by their item IDs. For the most part, you'll see that they are recolors of the same model and not super inspired or different. It does give those Viking vibes with the designs, the type of collars that the shirts have under the dresses, but they're all very dull in terms of the color, and they actually kind of look a bit dirty when you really look at them. I understand the direction that they took with this. Skyrim is a harsh and unforgiving land. Nobody has time for clean clothes, especially if you're part of the working class, and the world itself doesn't really call for over-the-top bright colors, which would be reserved for the richer NPCs anyway. Going back to those rich NPCs with their fine clothing, the options are very limited, and I wouldn't say that they stand out all that much from the regular folk living in the towns and the cities. There's definitely more color, but it's rather close to the other clothing. The reason that I mention this is because assuming we have richer NPCs, especially in places like Solitude, I would have expected some Cyrodiilic influence with velvet or pieces that are more detailed instead of just like an undershirt with a cloak over it. On the other hand, they do have the fur trim, which, you know, it is more practical for that chilly Skyrim climate. These pieces don't look bad. An explanation could be made for all of them, but there's a sense that more could have been done with this, and keeping in mind also that not everyone who lives in Skyrim is a Nord. Again, Cyrodiilic influence. The clothing has separate styles for both male and female characters, and the same item does appear differently on both genders, but it retains the same vibe. In the inventory, there is no art for the items as there was in Oblivion and Morrowind. It is just the physical item displayed on the right-hand side, but this is really just down to the overall decision that they made on the UI in this game. Some of my favorite pieces in this category are the tavern clothes, the wedding dress, and the set of clothes that we see Helga from Riften wearing. Moving on, let's talk about robes. Robes are mostly worn by mages, anyone that has anything to do with magic or alchemy, people from the College of Winterhold. We can also see priests from temples wearing them. This category consists of mainly 2 different models, and it is different recolors to suit the purpose that it needs. For example, the Vermina robes are just like the mage's robes, except they have this purple design on them, and they're actually probably my favorite in this category aside from the Emperor's robes, just because like it is a little bit different, a little shaken up. Only one type of the college robes can be obtained, and funny enough, you actually get them in the Radiant Raiment in Solitude, not in the college itself. Not a whole lot more to say about them, other than that they do have that kind of like old and really worn feeling about them. The colors again are pretty much in line with what we've seen before in the previous category. A special shout out to the vampire robes, which were all that vampires used to wear before the Dawnguard DLC. Up next we have hats, and this is something that I appreciate as neither Morrowind nor Oblivion did this, technically. Now, I know in Morrowind we have the Colovian fur helm, which I won't discredit in any way, it's great, but that item is actually considered armor. It has an armor value, and well, it's called Colovian fur helm. Considering Skyrim's climate, I'm glad that they have head items other than hoods. It adds some variety to the outfits as well as makes it so that the NPCs don't all look exactly the same as each other. I mean, at this point, any mixing and matching that we get is really good when all you have to work with are just these outfits that were slapped together. My favorite items in this category are the fine hat, the wedding wreath, and the chef's hat. Up next we have shoes and footwear. Most of the items in the category are actually boots, which again, considering the climate and the terrain, this is more appropriate and like a practical choose of footwear. One thing that I was kind of surprised about is the variety of boots available in the game, and I actually think that they were all quite well done. Once again, most of them are just called boots, and they have separate item IDs. Some are recolors of each other, but even still, a lot of these to me are actually quite recognizable pieces, and it is kind of refreshing to see that there is this attention to detail, even with items that are usually quite unremarkable. These boots here are probably my favorites in the category with the spiral button design. I also wanted to add that I'm really not a fan of the wedding sandals. I think that it actually makes the whole wedding outfit look kinda cheap. In reality, the person getting married is the Emperor's cousin, so I would have thought that there would have been something a bit more elegant than sandals, but anyway. I want to mention gloves here, and I know that there aren't a lot, but I appreciate that they're there anyway, again, just to sort of complete the outfits and also dress the NPCs for the weather. Let's talk about jewelry. So in Skyrim, they took the Oblivion route and created variants of the same model amulets and rings in either gold or silver and added different gemstones. There's less jewelry in Skyrim, however, it does seem to be in keeping up with the overall limited pool of fancy and expensive looking items in the game, so why stop at accessories? Here's the other thing. So the clothing that you would expect to pair the jewelry up with doesn't actually work too well when you put it on. So a lot of it sort of just clips through a part of the clothes, or it clashes with the jewelry built into the outfit, so it's sort of disappointing, especially if you look back to how cool amulets looked on NPCs wearing fancy clothes in Oblivion. With some outfits, it doesn't work at all. A special shout out to all of the amulets of the Divines. Now, I know they have special attributes to them, but I feel like they are some of the most iconic pieces of jewelry, not just in Skyrim, but in all of the Elder Scrolls games. Each amulet is unique and easily recognizable, the designs are perfect and they correspond to their respective Divines, and for once, the colors are bright and make the amulets really stand out. My favorites are the Amulet of Arkay, Dibella, Kinnereth, and Mara. Not much to say about the rings. You can only wear one ring, even though you have two hands, and they all pretty much look the same except for the different gems and metals. Circlets is the next thing that I want to cover, and I actually really like them. Despite the fact that they're all the same model with different metals and gems, I've always collected them when I played through the game. Sure, there may not be a whole lot of variety beyond that same model, but the fact that they're there at all is really nice. This is actually something that I mentioned in my Oblivion clothing video, but I think that not having circlets in Oblivion was a huge miss. they would have gone perfectly for the nobility paired with like existing items in the game. Then in Skyrim, we have the circlets, but the clothing that's there is just, it's a little lacking. The next thing I want to go over are the culture-specific pieces of clothing. Now, there isn't a lot, but I thought it would be good to focus in on a few of the pieces that we do have just to shake things up. First, we have the Thalmor clothes consisting of the robes that come with either a hood or without, the boots, and the gloves. It's really interesting to look at them even just for contrast's sake. So they do appear warm enough for the weather, but they have their own personality. The gold and the black, the details on the boots and the gloves. If you really analyze them, I would say that they're almost a league above what the nobles wear in Skyrim, which really makes sense considering how snobbish the High Elves are. They adapted to the climate, but they didn't sacrifice that part of themselves. Next we have the Hammerfell garb, or the Alikir hood and Redguard hood, most recognizable from the Zir of the Dark Brotherhood, and of course the two men that come looking for a woman in Whiterun. Arguably the coolest of these is the Redguard hood, the specific one that Nazir is wearing, and this is only attainable if you either kill Nazir during the Destroy the Dark Brotherhood quest, or you have the perfect touch perk and you pickpocket it off him. Same goes for the Hammerfell garb, which has the unique Redguard clothes version of it, so it's in red and only worn by Nazir. I really like these pieces. I think it makes the NPCs that wear it really stand out, really show the cultural difference, and you know, they've clearly come a long way to be here. Their attire suggests that they were moving through the desert. Overall, these are probably my favorite, or like amongst my top favorite pieces of cosmetic items in the game. Moving over to Solstheim, we have the Dunmer clothing, available in red, yellow, and blue. This has both a hooded and a hoodless version. You'll see the NPCs around Ravenrock wearing this, and honestly, full disclosure, I wish they did more with this. And what I mean is that these Dunmer outfits are really unremarkable. And that was like a thing that disappointed me in Solstheim overall, because even the theoretical ruler of Solstheim is just dressed in the regular fine clothes from Skyrim. Especially after doing my clothing in Morrowind video, I see that they had so much potential to include even a couple of callbacks to like the clothing in the game originally, which by the way was super impressive. But instead they went with like the bleak colors and some outfits that are just straight out of Skyrim. I was especially surprised by how lackluster it is, considering that they did include the bone mold armor, which is like straight out of Morrowind. That was super exciting to see, but I guess that was as far as they were willing to take it. Skyrim did not do justice to the great fashion sense of the Dunmer people. There is one saving grace though, the temple priest robes as worn by the two priests in the Ravenrock temple. I'm actually uncertain as to whether or not this item is attainable by pickpocketing or killing either of the priests. At least when I tried to kill them both, they went down as essential NPCs and came back up, so if somebody knows, let me know in the comments. These robes are stunning, and they're a lot closer to what you would actually see NPCs in Morrowind wear, and I'm so glad that they included these instead of just like slapping on the typical temple priest robes from Skyrim and calling it a day. Lastly, let's take a look at some recognizable but unattainable pieces in the game. Most of these items can be attained through console commands and probably some mods, but let's have a look at them anyway. Going from the culture-specific ones, we have the Skull Villager robes, only attainable via console commands, and they're actually the same model as the mythic Dawn robes, so those actually have an additional variant without a hood, and the latter can be obtained by the player. Telvanni robes, as worn by Master Neloth, are also on the list. Now, a variant of these robes can be obtained by a completion of a quest, but the exact ones that Neloth wears cannot. That is, they will appear the exact same on males, but on the female characters they have the broken heartstone harness, the bloodstains, and like the gray color, so it's not the same. Perhaps the most notable pieces here are the Greybeard's clothes, so again, only obtained via console commands. The embroidered garment, as worn by Jarl Elisif and High King Torg, is apparently only attainable via glitch, according to the unofficial wiki, but I would imagine that there is some sort of a mod that lets you have this as well. Finally, for some other recognizable pieces, we have Sheogorath's clothes and the Sijic robes and hood. So these pieces here are actually super colorful, which again just makes them stand out so much from everything else that we've seen. And there you have it, guys, clothing in Skyrim. I will admit, there was definitely a lot more that they could have done here, and I'm not fully on board with the idea that just because life in Skyrim is not easy, all their clothes has to look like they roll around in mud all day. I mean, even the bottom part of the fine clothes looks sturdy. That said, it does help to tell the story in its own way. Skyrim is not for everybody, and if you're going to live here, you need to be prepared for the harsh winter weather, the rough terrain, and all of the dangers that you may come across while you're on the road. The color palette is just another way way in which the game reminds you of where you are. You're not in the lavish Imperial City anymore, the green forests of Cyrodiil. The sands aren't warm here. This is also part of the reason why some pieces are especially effective, like the Amulets of the Divines or the Temple Priest robes from Solstheim. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, not everything can be super flashy and over the top all the time, and that's okay. And that about covers it for our clothing and Skyrim videos, so thank you guys for watching. Again, I've really put this off for a long time. I did it because I thought I wouldn't have anything good to say, but really it wasn't as bad as I expected. If you're enjoying this channel, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I am very happy to have you all here. I also want to say a huge thanks for another milestone. We have reached 25,000 subscribers. Really appreciate all the love, and I'm having a lot of fun doing this channel, as I've said a couple times before. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Be seeing you. Bye!